By the end of Tomb Raider Underworld, it was obvious that Lara Croft, in her current incarnation, had to change once again. By this point, she was over a decade into her career as a Tomb Raider, and she was beginning to feel too old, too set in her ways. Very manually driven platforming that was extremely easy to mess up didn't complement Gunplay so boring it put the average person to sleep, especially in the era of the 7th console generation. No, a new kid on the block had stepped up and easily snatched the throne away. So the clock needed to be wound back to introduce Lara for a new audience, a fresh face for a fresh generation, both ready to take their first steps onto a new adventure. The only one ended up way over her head in the process. I'm Sam Callahan, and let's begin with our descent into Tomb Raider 2013. But before that, I want to emphasize a few things here. To start, there are a few trigger warnings with regards to a section at the beginning on extreme violence with some graphic depictions on screen. Additionally, I'm going to speak on Lara as a specifically cis female character in the Tomb Raider games, and as a cis male myself, I can only give an onlooker's perspective while filling in some developer notes where I could. So yes, my viewpoint is imperfect, but while replaying this game for the upteenth time for this video, these are some of the things I couldn't help but notice. And though it has some problems that we'll get to in a moment, it was exciting then, and still is today, to play a female character in an action-adventure game like this. For as much as I enjoy the Nathan Drakes of the world, Lara is written as a character who's really starting from the ground up. She's not nearly as capable at the start of her adventures as their industry compatriots, but that gives the story at least something to immediately work towards. Though maybe series writer Rihanna Pratchett and the rest of the team took that a little too far, because it's difficult to discuss Tomb Raider without mentioning something that envelops a lot of the experience. The violence. While not quite as extreme as something like, say, the later Saw movies, it's still far and away more gruesome than anything that happens in Uncharted or any Ubisoft game of the time. If we're being generous here, we can say that the violence inflicted against Lara is to simply reaffirm the theme of survival comes at any cost, but it's really hard not to see this from some sort of gendered perspective.
I always find Она тоже была порядочной стервой.
Even before the game's release, Kotaku ran a story quoting an executive producer saying, quote, "When people play Lara, they don't really project themselves into the character. They're more like, I want to protect her. She literally goes from zero to hero. We're sort of building her up, and just when she gets confident, we break her back down again." Unquote. These comments, along with almost everything else from the interview, was rescinded by Crystal Dynamics a few weeks later, but it's really hard not to wonder if any of the developers had similar ideas about Lara, though that's only speculation on my part, based on many, many past examples of other media. If we take that away though, we come to what would seem to be a reasonable conclusion that the violence exists to dissuade the player from doing poorly, or worse, outright dying. The problem with that is what Mark Brown of Game Maker's Toolkit pointed out in an article he wrote for Polygon, wherein he said, quote, "Not dying is kind of the whole point of the game. I don't want to die because I want to get to the next part of the game." Unquote. And make no mistake, if you haven't seen them before, some of these deaths are pretty gruesome, often lasting just a few extra seconds to let the whole moment set in. But that doesn't matter, because even if you do an absolutely perfect run of Tomb Raider, never dying, and even never getting shot, there are still scripted moments that happen throughout the entire game, not just the beginning, that illustrate pain and suffering to Lara. From the moment she arrives to the island to the moment she leaves, she is constantly thrown around, beaten, and bloodied, and it's all done in a way that often reminded me of old female-fronted revenge fantasies like I Spit on Your Grave, rather than more Indiana Jones fun-faring action that the rest of the gameplay is. Again, as Mark Brown says in the Polygon article, quote, "The theme is writing checks that the design can't cash, creating an incongruous mix between gameplay and narrative. And those grisly death scenes, followed by an immediate return to the action from just 10 seconds previous, are the most jarring reminder that all of Tomb Raider is trying to be way more hardcore than it really is." This may all seem like errant rambling, and that's because to a degree it is, But I would feel really remiss if I didn't mention the violence of Tomb Raider from the start, because whether it's inflicted on Lara Croft or later her enemies, it's something that has constantly cast a shadow over the gameplay of TR. Whether in an effort to make you want to protect our protagonist, make her root for the slaying of all the vile men in her way, or just to differentiate it from Uncharted, the game relishes in bloody acts in a way that I never quite forgot. So yeah, I know it's a bit of a heady topic to just dive right into the start. So for those of you who made it this far, I imagine you're thinking right now, well, what about everything else? Well, for better or worse, the actual story being told here is pretty bland on all fronts. From cinematography that's only good enough to function but not nearly filmic quality, which is probably a discussion for another time, to characters to fulfill the basic archetypes of the friend, the mentor, the hard-ass, the guide, the traitor, the villain, and the white guy. We'll get to him later. It's all there, so to speak, but having played this game multiple times now, I can safely say that I don't come back to it for the narrative. But then, why do I keep coming back? Because the game is just fun as hell. It has a wonderful, brisk pace to the whole adventure, and that can be broken down into a few aspects. The most obvious is the shooting. While reviewers at the time seemed to kind of glaze over it as just, it's good, there's really so much more to it that makes it one of the best games of its respective genre. Like the auto cover, for instance. While most games use a traditional cover button since the days of Kill.Switch and Gears of War, Tomb Raider adopted something more like Army of Two, wherein Lara just crouches down behind things as needed. While in the aforementioned Army of Two and other games like it was bad because it was super finicky and didn't actually need to not be handled by a button, Tomb Raider takes full advantage of this by building environments with often destructible cover, grenade spam, and most importantly, mobility in mind. Lara is able to freely, and at least often gracefully, exit wherever she's ducking behind to make a quick jump to a platform above or below, and use more of her arena to her advantage. The gunplay pairs well with this, being that it's incredibly simple to get decent at, and not much harder to almost master. Even so, the extra ripple added is the environmental hazards, them being using rope arrows to destroy cover, or remove platforms altogether, or fire arrows to do the same, plus create hazardous areas. And I gotta give credit where it's due for Tomb Raider adhering to one of my all-time favorite design principles in shooters. In a game with multiple weapons, is the pistol always useful? It actually is. And it makes me so happy for no good reason to see it, and the rest of the weapons be consistently useful throughout the entirety of the combat and exploration. And within that exploration, you're going to occasionally run across a familiar sound. And want to check it out. While many people lamented the tombs all being optional in the game, I myself like the decision for letting the player dictate the pacing of the adventure for themselves. Once found, you have the choice to hop right along to the next set piece right away if you want, or you can take a breather for a few minutes to solve a light puzzle. Now, Joseph Anderson acutely points out in his video that,
unfortunately, the puzzles in this game are so insultingly simple that the process and the answer are usually one and the same. There is little thought, and the solution is interact with those objects in the only real way that you can. The end.
Which is admittedly true, but even so, I found the tombs to be nice little bits of extra quiet time that were there only when I wanted them. Even the collectibles manage to serve multiple purposes. In the first game, there's a very careful balance that's achieved here. Just enough to nab one off the beaten path every once in a while, but not too many to be overwhelming. And they're also nice because Lara gets to show off more of her character by making informed comments and educated guesses on what she's holding, which does a good job of showing her to be more than just a shooter protagonist. All of these aspects tie together into a simple yet very effective pseudo-Metroidvania of sorts. It's fun to get new stuff like the shotgun or the rope arrows to access new parts of old areas, and in doing so maybe trip over some collectibles you missed or finally run that optional team you decided to opt out of before. And gaining all the collectibles behind basic story progress, rather than a shop of some kind, keeps the flow going consistently. It's a real shame that seemingly half the cast has to die in the process of getting said gear, not because it's truly sad or anything, but because they're all so completely shoehorned in that I felt like they only existed to further that survival at any cost, violent actions and gory deaths, suffering incarnate mood that I spoke of at the top of this video. Let me put it this way. Each of these characters between Grimm, Roth, Alex, Not You, and Matthias are supposed to further Laura's growth as a character, but while they're all framed dramatically and the cast act as if these deaths are important to them, said characters besides Laura are so utterly flat in their backstories and development that they're absolutely impossible to give a crap about. Like honestly, tell me something about Grimm. Literally anything beyond that he's the Scottish dude who you might remember does something heroic before he dies at some point. Which is actually pretty common among several of the male characters now that I think about it. And Roth, her supposed mentor, whose death should be the crux at which the story pivots to the newer, self-assured Laura, only fares slightly better than Grimm. While Laura has some interactions with him in cutscenes, they don't actually mean anything. Roth and Laura sometimes talk about their past together, but it's never shown in any capacity, and worse yet, it misses a prime opportunity for gameplay. Now, I know no one likes tutorials, and flashbacks are obviously extremely cliche already, but with Roth being the old mentor figure he is, there would have been a really neat chance to have Laura start off with the boat sinking and washing ashore as it already does, but then before climbing something or shooting the bow or such, cut to a gameplay flashback wherein Roth first shows her how to do these things. Practicing climbing a rock wall, bouncing on a beam, or doing archery at the Croft Manor before snapping back to Laura having to do it in a real test of survival. The writers could have taken this even one step further, taking the parts where Laura internally comments on not being self-assured, and adding Roth's voice reminding her that she can do this. This way, Laura can still in time become the badass woman she was destined to be, but demonstrate with much greater detail that she had help in the beginning, and that's okay. But what's worse than Roth, what's far, far worse, is Alex.
Lara's totally right. Something seriously fucked up is going on here.
Even if you've played the game before, you might be forgiven for forgetting about this idiot.
Bad storms, more like, makes the Bermuda Triangle look like Disney World.
Because oh, poor Alex. Poor old cis-white straight boy Alex. Not only is he poorly written in his own right, he is in fact so bad that I feel his mere existence undermines Laura's triumphs at every turn. I'm gonna explain this by skipping right to the end of his saga. He showcases a heroic moment wherein he risks his own life to get some valuable tools for the rest of his crew, which should be a decent, if not good moment for him, but the tape that plays right before that section reveals his true reasoning for going out and paints it in a bad light.
I wish I could be more like Lara. She blows me away. Not only is she brilliant, but she's also an amazing ass kicker. Now, if she didn't notice me before, she sure as hell won't now. But maybe I can still do something to get her attention.
Suddenly, the focus shifts from doing what is selfish and what is right to doing it for the girl, which is about one of the oldest tropes in modern media, and it has really not aged well. While Brianna Pratchett herself said that she wanted Laura's arc to be viewed from a more gender-neutral perspective, it's writing like this that hurts that a lot, because this blatantly would not happen with a male protagonist and female side character. And it hurts because viewed this way, it feels like Laura can't be a badass for her own sake. Now she can only be one in the light of others so that they can praise her for it. We already know Laura's awesome, knowledgeable, and ever more capable. No one needed some white nerdy guy to point out in no uncertain terms that she's hot. At best, it's yet another brick in the wall of a trope that should have died decades ago, and at worst, it feels like awful pandering. Pandering to the likely many straight white men who played this game and thought, well, if I can't pretend to be the dude who gets to save the chick, then at least I can pretend to be the dude who gets to save the day and go out in a blaze of glory. While vigorously slamming Mountain Dew down their throats. In a perfect world, Alex would be forgotten past this point. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Funnily enough, Matthias turns out to be the most interesting character in the game, Laura aside. He exists as a dark future for her, wherein with enough time, she might eventually abandon her humanity, yet there's still an understandable method to his madness. He's been stranded on this strange Children of Men island for so long that he's willing to do anything to simply get off of it. At least that's what it would be until later, but we're not there yet. And when Matthias feels he can overpower a weak-willed Laura at the beginning, he tries, and when he feels he can't anymore, he just takes Sam and runs. And yes, Sam exists. She's functionally a damsel in distress, which I found really strange considering Laura's narrative of strength, but even with context in the story as to why she's important because of her heritage.
I've heard it said that in the game of patriarchy, women are not the opposing team, they are the ball.
It's really not a good look. That said, by the end, it doesn't really matter, as in the final moments of gameplay, with Matthias about to kill everyone, Laura finally takes out her iconic dual pistols of series past, demonstrating that she is now the fully capable and badass warrior she's known to be, leaving the series sequel to take on the reins for next time. Except, said pistols are nowhere to be seen in future games, and Laura has a ton of real problems to sort out before returning to Rise of the Tomb Raider years later. That, though, is for next time. Thanks for watching.